8 years ago, I held my best friend while he died in my arms, and there was nothing my training could do about it. I became a nurse afterward because I couldn't stop needing to take care of soldiers, even after I stopped being one. I never expected the war to walk back through my door, but it did, on an ordinary Tuesday, wearing the face of the man who gave the order that got him killed. His name was Colonel Hayes. He didn't recognize me at first. I recognized him instantly. And before that week was over, I was going to have to decide whether saving his life meant forgiving him for costing me the person I loved most in this world. I've worked the medical surgical floor at Ridgeway VA Medical Center for 6 years, mostly because it's the only kind of nursing that ever felt like coming home instead of just going to work. Every patient on my floor served. Every one of them carries some version of what I carry, even if most of them never talk about it any more than I do. My coworkers know I'm good with the hard cases, the veterans who flinch at loud noises, the ones who won't let anyone stand behind them, the ones the young residents don't know how to talk to. They think it's empathy. It's not just empathy, it's recognition. I don't tell people I served. My file says I did military medical support for 4 years, which is true in the way that leaving out the worst parts of a sentence still leaves you with a true sentence. There was a patient a few weeks before any of this happened, an older man named Mr. Ferris, 3 days post-op, who woke from anesthesia swinging at an orderly because the beeping monitors had dropped him straight back into somewhere considerably louder and more dangerous than a recovery room. I was the one who got called in. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat down slowly, in his eye line, hands visible, and said the 4 words I've said more times than I could count. "You're safe. I'm here." It took maybe 90 seconds for him to come all the way back. Nobody on that floor asked me how I knew exactly what to say. They've stopped asking, mostly, the way people do once they decide a mystery isn't worth the discomfort of an answer. I thought I'd built a life sturdy enough to hold all of that. I was wrong about that on a Tuesday in October, when a new admission came through with a name on his chart that stopped my whole body cold before I'd even read the room number. Danny Ruiz was the best medic I ever served with, and I mean that as a professional fact, not just a grieving one. He could find a vein in a moving vehicle in the dark. He carried extra protein bars for the interpreters nobody else remembered to feed. He had a laugh that showed up at exactly the wrong, most necessary moments. The kind of laugh that reminds an entire truck full of frightened 20-year-olds that they're still allowed to be human beings. We'd deployed together twice by the time it happened. He taught me half of what I still know about staying steady when everything around you is on fire. And I like to think I taught him something too, though he always said I was too serious to have taught anybody anything except how to worry properly. He kept a photo of his sister taped inside his helmet. Not for luck exactly, more like a compass. A reminder of a version of the world that still had ordinary things in it. Birthdays and bad television and arguments about nothing. He talked about going home and opening a little clinic in her town once his contract was up. Small stuff. Real stuff. The kind of plan that makes a person feel like a person instead of just a set of skills wearing a uniform. I tell you all of this because you can't understand what it cost to lose him unless you understand, even a little, who he actually was before he became a name on a memorial wall. He wasn't just my partner. He was proof that you could carry that job and still stay soft in the places that mattered. I don't tell this part of the story often, but I'm going to tell it now. Because you can't understand what happened next without understanding what happened 8 years ago. We were 9 vehicles deep into a supply corridor that intelligence had flagged that same morning as elevated risk. Colonel Hayes made the call to proceed anyway. Command needed the route open. And there is a version of military logic where that decision was completely defensible. And there's another version where it cost 4 men their lives before the sun came up. The IED hit the 3rd vehicle, Danny's vehicle. I was 2 trucks back, and I remember the sound before I remember deciding to move. A sound that doesn't have a good comparison, the kind that rearranges something permanently in whatever part of your brain stores memory. I ran. Gunfire opened up almost immediately from the ridgeline, which meant the corridor wasn't just compromised, it was an ambush, fully prepared, waiting for exactly this convoy at exactly this hour. I got to Danny's vehicle under fire, dragged him clear, and started doing everything 4 years of training had built into my hands without needing my permission. It wasn't enough. The wound was too high, too deep, too much all at once, and I knew within maybe 90 seconds that I was not stopping this one no matter what I did. I kept working anyway, because stopping felt like agreeing with what I already knew, and I wasn't ready to agree with it yet. He looked at me once, near the end, clear-eyed in a way that still visits me some nights, and he said, "Tell my sister I wasn't scared." He was lying. I could see that he was scared. I told her anyway, exactly the way he asked me to, because some lies are the only mercy you have left to give somebody. Command changed convoy protocol 2 weeks later. New intelligence thresholds, a mandatory hold procedure that saved an unknown number of lives since. Nobody ever told me that in a way that made Danny's death feel like it meant something instead of just costing something. I've spent 8 years carrying both of those facts at the same time, unable to make them add up into anything that feels like peace. I finished out my contract in a kind of numb autopilot I'm still not entirely proud of. I stopped sleeping through a night without waking up once. I stopped being able to hear a vehicle backfire without my whole body deciding, for half a second, that it needed to move. I left the service 11 months later and did the thing that made the least sense to almost everyone who knew me, and the most sense to the only part of me that still felt like it belonged anywhere. I went to nursing school. I told myself it was because the skills transferred easily. The truth was simpler and harder to say out loud. I needed to keep taking care of people wearing the same boots I once did, without ever again being the one who has to decide, in real time, who lives and who doesn't. Ridgway hired me 6 years ago. I built a quiet, careful life around 36-hour work weeks and a studio apartment with exactly one framed photo on the wall. Danny, grinning, sunburned, a week before the corridor, an arm slung around my shoulder like the whole world was still just an ordinary, survivable place. I thought that life was going to be enough to carry the weight permanently. Most weeks, it almost was. Colonel Robert Hayes, 71 years old, admitted for chest pain and shortness of breath, history of cardiac disease, here for observation and likely a procedure within the week. I stood in the hallway outside his room, holding a chart I already knew everything about and nothing I wanted to. Robert Hayes had commanded my unit for that second deployment. Robert Hayes had made the call that pushed us through a corridor our own intelligence had flagged as compromised. I never blamed him out loud. I'm not sure I ever let myself blame him quietly either, because the truth sitting underneath all of it was simpler and worse. I couldn't save Danny, and some part of me needed somewhere else to put that particular weight for 8 years. I walked into his room anyway, because he was my patient, and because 8 years of nursing had taught me that a person's worst day doesn't stop needing a nurse just because she happens to have history with the man in the bed. He looked up at me, older than I remembered, thinner, tubes already threaded into one arm. "Nurse?" he said, polite, entirely unaware. "Thank you for coming." He didn't recognize me at all. For 2 days, I let it stay that way. I checked his vitals in the same professional, unremarkable voice I use for every patient on that floor. I told myself distance was going to be enough to get through his stay without either of us having to say anything true. My friend Nadia, a nurse on the same rotation, caught me staring through his doorway on the second afternoon, longer than any chart check requires. "You okay?" she asked, the specific tone she uses when she already suspects the answer is complicated. "Old patient overlap," I said, which was true and also nowhere close to the whole truth. Just processing some things. Nadia didn't push. She's the one coworker who's noticed, over 6 years, that certain rooms cost me more than others, without ever once asking me to explain why. "Take your time," she said. "I've got your other patients covered if you need 5 minutes." I took the 5 minutes. I stood in the supply closet with my back against the shelving and my eyes closed, and did not cry, mostly out of stubbornness, and went back out to finish my shift like a person who had that particular feeling fully under control. I did not, in fact, have it under control, not even slightly. On the third night, he asked me to sit for a minute, the way lonely patients sometimes do at 2 in the morning when the hospital goes quiet enough that loneliness gets loud. "You remind me of someone," he said, "a medic I served with. Best one I ever had, actually. Lost her partner in an ambush I called. Corridor push, bad intel. I've thought about that morning most days for 8 years." Something in my chest went very still. "What happened to her?" I asked. "The medic." He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. "She left the service not long after. I never got the chance to tell her the one thing I actually wanted her to know, and by the time I went looking, she'd already disappeared into a civilian life I couldn't find a trace of." "What did you want to tell her?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. "That the boy she lost, Daniel, I think his name was, his death is the reason 400 and some soldiers came home safe over the following 2 years. Command finally believed the threat assessments after that morning. They stopped ignoring flagged corridors. I've never been able to make that fact feel like enough, but it's the truest thing I have to offer anybody who lost something that day, including myself." I stood very still, looking at a man who had just handed me, completely by accident, the exact sentence I'd needed for 8 years and never once expected to receive. I didn't tell him who I was that night. I wasn't ready yet. I said goodnight, checked his monitor one more time than was strictly necessary, and walked out into a hallway that felt different than it had an hour earlier. His monitor alarm went off the following afternoon, sharp and continuous, the tone that means a heart has stopped agreeing to keep its own rhythm. I was in that room in under 10 seconds. Hayes was in V-fib, his color already draining, the particular gray that means a body is losing its argument with itself in real time. I called the code, started compressions before the crash cart even arrived, and felt 8 years of civilian nursing and 4 years of something considerably more urgent collapse into the exact same set of hands. "Charge to 200, I said, and the resident on call, barely 30 seconds into the room, did exactly what I told him without questioning why a nurse was giving orders in a code, because something in my voice apparently didn't leave room for questioning it. First shock, nothing. Second shock, and I dropped back into compressions immediately, counting under my breath the way I'd counted 100 times before, in circumstances considerably less forgiving than a hospital floor with a full code team 2 minutes out. "Come on," I said, to him, to the universe, to 8 years of guilt I wasn't ready to lose twice in one lifetime. Not this one, not him too. The third shock brought his rhythm back, thin and irregular at first, then settling, slowly, into something that looked survivable. The room exhaled as one unit, the specific collective breath a code team takes when the worst outcome doesn't happen. I stepped back from the bed with my hands trembling, in a way they genuinely had not trembled in 8 years of doing this exact kind of work, because this time, for the first time since Danny, the stakes had a name I couldn't separate from my own history. Dr. Park, the attending who ran in halfway through the code, pulled me aside afterward, in the hallway outside Hayes's room, with the particular look of someone who just watched something they couldn't quite categorize. "That code," she said, "the compressions, the way you called the shock timing before I even had the paddles ready, that wasn't standard pacing, that was field trauma pacing. Where'd you learn that?" "Somewhere a long time ago," I said, which was true and also as much of an answer as I had any intention of giving. She studied me for a moment, then nodded, the way people do when they decide a mystery isn't theirs to solve. "Whatever it was," she said, "it kept him alive today. I'm not going to ask twice." I appreciated that more than she probably knew. Hayes woke up the next morning lucid, tired, achingly grateful in the specific way people get after they've been shown, up close, exactly how thin the line actually is. I sat with him for a while once his family had stepped out for coffee, mostly because I wasn't ready yet to leave the room without saying something true. "You said a name yesterday," I said. "Daniel. The medic's partner." He looked at me carefully. "I did." "I was there," I said. "I was the medic. I held him. I've spent 8 years not able to decide if I hate you or just hate what happened, and I still don't fully know the answer. But I needed you to know that I was the one who told his sister he wasn't scared, even though he was, because he asked me to lie for him at the end, and it's the only thing I've ever been sure I did right that day." Hayes went very still, tears gathering that he didn't bother hiding. He stopped, started again. "I looked for you. After. I wanted to tell you what I told you yesterday without knowing it was you. I wanted you to know his death mattered beyond that morning." "I know now," I said. "I think some part of me needed to hear it from you specifically, not just as a fact, but as an apology I didn't know I was still waiting for." "I am sorry," Hayes said, voice thick. "Every day since. That's not nearly enough, and I know it." "No," I agreed, "but it's something. And today it turns out I got to be the reason you're still here to say it. I think Danny would have found that funny, actually. He always did like a complicated ending." For the first time in 8 years, we both actually laughed. Small and wet and real, in a hospital room that had almost become one more thing grief took from both of us. Hayes was discharged 11 days later, heart stable, headed home to a daughter and 2 grandchildren he talked about more, I noticed, in the week after that conversation than he had in the 2 weeks before it. He sends a card at Christmas now. I send one back. Neither of us has found a way to make it less complicated than it is, and I've stopped expecting either of us to. I told Nadia the whole story a few days later, over coffee in the break room, and she just listened, the way she always has, and said, "That's the heaviest good news I've ever heard someone deliver with a straight face." She wasn't wrong. I visited Danny's grave for the first time in 3 years the following weekend. I told him what Hayes told me, that the corridor changed after him, that 400 soldiers came home over the next 2 years, partly because of a mistake nobody made twice. I don't know if that makes his death mean something or just makes it slightly easier to carry. Maybe, for some griefs, those are the same thing wearing different names. I still work the med-surg floor at Ridgeway. I still don't tell most people what I did before this. But I don't carry it quite the same way anymore. And some mornings, that's the whole entire difference between a life you're surviving and one you've actually decided to keep living. If you've ever needed someone to hand you back a piece of your own story you thought was lost for good, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.